The spectre of misfortune arouses me, it amuses me, and when I cannot do evil myself, I delight in the evil done by the hand of fate.
Fortune showers them with favors, while I face an imminent death. This is what men have done to me. This is what I have learned from the dangers of associating with them. Is it surprising that, embittered by misfortune and revolted by outrages and injustices, I should, in my heart, aspire only to avoid all contact with them in the future?
The fear of God fills my heart. I loved you once until my last moment of serenity. I pray for you, not for me.
Hello everyone, Adrian here. So today is a very special installment on my series on Gothic literature, and I will be reviewing Justine by Marquis de Sade. So I was a little bit skeptical about reading his work in the first place because obviously I knew the man by reputation, you know, someone who is responsible for the term sadism. Doesn't sound like he's a pretty good dude, and yeah. I came into friendship with the lead singer of Her Despair, Jay, and we were discussing Gothic literature, we were discussing Charles Baudelaire, and as it turned out, we had the exact same edition of Les Fleurs du Mal, which is bilingual, and it's awesome. Love it. So in discussing Gothic literature and how much we adore it, he mentioned Marquis de Sade. So that kind of took me aback a little bit. I was just like, oh hell. Because I honestly didn't know what to expect. I understood that he was sadistic, but I didn't really know what to expect with his work. So he highly recommended it to me. I trusted him on his good taste, and I got a few books by Marquis de Sade. So I'm really excited to share it with you today. I will warn you, this story and this video is not for the faint of heart, but I really do hope that you enjoy it because I really want to share it with you. So first, let me apologize in advance for my brief biography on Marquis de Sade being so long, but please bear with me. Ugh. It'll really give you a better understanding of the man behind the works. Oh boy. Yeah, I gotta prepare myself for this. Marquis de Sade was born Donatien Alphonse François de Sade on June 2nd, 1740 to a nobleman Comte de Sade and Maée de Carman, who was a lady-in-waiting to a princess. So pretty high society stuff up there. The two most important influences in his life were his father, who knew Voltaire, and his uncle Abbé Jacques-François de Sade, who had an extensive library of classic and Enlightenment literature, as well as some erotic works. One thing that really affected Donatien during his youth was the absence of his mother. He was her only son, but she was barely involved in his life. All of the elements of his early life would significantly influence his work. At the age of 10, he began attending a Jesuit college in Paris, only to enter into a military school 4 years later, subsequently serving in the military until 1759. As a young adult, the sick fantasies in his mind began to manifest into action. Oh man. In 1763, a prostitute testified that during an encounter with the disturbed Marquis, he engaged in many blasphemous acts involving holy objects like chalices, holy wafers, and shoving them in places. On top of this, he also threatened her with whipping. Holy hell. Oh. I can breathe, can I? I think I can. Throughout the decades, he would be thrown in prisons and insane asylums several times for his acts of debauchery. Even when he was married in 1763 to a woman named Renée, who inexplicably loved and supported him throughout his life, he still recruited, and sometimes kidnapped, young women and prostitutes so that he could act out his twisted sexual urges. Actions included, but not limited to, whipping, pouring hot wax into the whipping wounds, and sodomy. He even had an affair with his wife's youngest sister fresh out of convent school. During his periods in prison, he spent a lot of time reading the kind of literature that he read as a young boy and started writing his works. He started out with stage dramas, then moving on to comedic and tragic stories. And then he published Justine ou le malheur de la vertu, or The Misfortunes of Virtue, in 1791, going on to write its companion, Juliette, or The Prosperities of Vice, in 1797. A few years later, he would release a collection of short stories called Crimes of Love. I actually got to read that before reading Justine, and it was really good, but I will save that for another time. Yeah. His wife died during his final period of imprisonment in the early 1800s. One of his sons would die in military service in Italy. From 1812 till his death, he had one final affair with a 16-year-old girl named Madeleine. Mind you, he's 72 years old at this point. Fucking ew. And apparently Madeleine was rumored to give him sexual advances for money. However, diary entries from her say that the aging Marquis doted on her but was jealous of her relationships with other young men. Before his death, he said, "The traces of my grave will disappear from the surface of the earth as I trust my memory will disappear from the memory of men, except for those few who were kind enough to love me until the last, and fond memories of whom I take with me into my grave." Wow. That's just really humble. Really, really humble. So it seemed that age and imprisonment did eventually reveal his softer side. He appeared reflective and very remorseful in his last days. The martyr for atheism finally died on December 2nd, 1814 at the age of 74. Per his request, he was buried in an unmarked grave, but his surviving son later gave his father a Christian burial. That would have made the Marquis turn in his grave. Literally. In 1815, Justine and many other works of his were banned. In 1834, the French term sadisme made it into Boyce's Dictionnaire Universel, and that's where we get the terms sadism, sadist, and sadistic. He left quite a legacy behind, let's just say that. Now for the story of Justine, Les Malheurs de la Vertu. Two sisters, Justine, age 12, and Juliette, age 15, go their separate ways. In more ways than one. The abbess of a nunnery they are sent to casts her evil influence on Juliette, but Justine will not forsake her virtue for her faith. The abbess kicks both of them out when she learns that their father has died. Juliette uses her corrupt learnings to advance in class and eventually into a good position, but Justine's problems, they've only just begun. And they will continue for the next 14 years. Oh, man. They begin with Justine rejecting the sexual advances of a priest that she seeks out for confession and possible support. She escapes and finds herself in the clutches of miscreants who assault her endlessly. As if that weren't enough, she is falsely accused of theft and faced with the threat of execution. Oh boy, it just doesn't get any better, does it? Justine is then forced to join with the blackguard Miss Dubois, who convinces her to set the prison on fire to escape, killing 21 people in the process. She mistakenly wanders to the estate of Comte de Sade, who violates her without any restraint. From there, things continue to get worse and worse. She becomes a sex slave in a monastery, is lured to caverns beneath the chateau of a robbery victim. Even before the feet of a judge, she is downtrodden, completely defenseless. Every time she escapes from a conundrum, there is a thread of hope that things will definitely look up. But the minute that she places that sacred trust in a stranger, they betray that trust and sever that hope with a very sharp dagger. Will there be any relief for poor Justine? Read it and find out. Okay, now that we've taken a breath and digested all of that, let's carry on. While many may not directly consider the work of Marquis de Sade to be Gothic, we do need to take a step back and examine it, considering what we know makes up a Gothic story. In this analysis, in linking Justine and de Sade's twisted writings to Gothic literature, I will be focusing a lot on Matthew Gregory Lewis and Anne Radcliffe because they are the two authors that came to mind to me the most while reading this. And I do like to place a lot of importance on early Gothic literature, as it kind of sets the tone for Gothic fiction in future generations. Terror and horror are so far opposite, said Anne Radcliffe in her book on the supernatural in poetry, that the first expands the soul and awakens the faculties to a higher degree of life. The other contracts, freezes, and nearly annihilates them. Anne Radcliffe knew what she was talking about. Love her. Here in Justine, the two are perfectly balanced. The feeling of dread and horror leads to the graphic horror of the depraved acts that the villain subject Justine to. Ugh. Oh man. Consider that this story is very anti-establishment, most notably against religion. Some of her tormentors are holy men. Perhaps in this Marquis de Sade wished to convey that religion is corrupt, such as Matthew Gregory Lewis did in The Monk. That's what got him into trouble. While Justine is devoutly Catholic, most of her tormentors are atheistic, questioning why, after all she's been through, she clings to her belief in God. Marquis de Sade did think that Gothic fiction was extremely important, even praising Matthew Gregory Lewis and Anne Radcliffe as the greatest authors of the genre. Ambrosio in The Monk, you could say, is a very Sadean character. The villains of Anne Radcliffe's and Matthew Gregory Lewis's stories share the unspeakable cruelty of de Sade's villains. Kinda cool. There is a time when Justine is locked in a below-ground crypt. Matthew Gregory Lewis echoes this in The Monk. Those parts are really intense in both books. I enjoyed it. I noticed a lot of similarities between the character of Justine and other early Gothic heroines and anti-heroines. The common thread among the heroines of Anne Radcliffe is strong will and virtue. They all refuse to submit to the horrors that their captors and antagonists subject them to. Emily in The Mysteries of Udolpho, Adeline in The Romance of the Forest, Elena in The Italian. Gotta love them. These virtuous heroines are also echoed in The Monk with Antonia and in The Castle Spectre with Angela. In Justine, there actually is a part where she starts to fall in love with one of her transgressors, just as Matilda does in The Monk. Overall, I loved this story. It was kind of hard to get through because it was so brutal and intense at times, but it was extremely thrilling and so beautifully well written. It is not a story for the faint of heart. It really isn't. So if you think that you can handle it, I highly recommend checking it out. So one thing that I can't help thinking about. Remember in my video about Charles Baudelaire when I talked about how he was put on trial for obscenity for writing Les Fleurs du Mal? Marquis de Sade got in some very serious trouble for his acts of depravity, and his works were banned after his death. Considering what I've read here, this was violent, this was terrifying, and this was pornographic. Like, really pornographic. He is straight up describing pussies and dicks here in graphic detail. Yeah, when I say pornographic, I am not kidding. Le Fleur du Mal itself was the reason that Baudelaire was put on trial for being blasphemous, obscene, and pornographic. 6 of his poems were banned until 1949 during his lifetime. In my opinion, Le Fleur du Mal was tame compared to this. Mind you, this was in 1857. Justine came out in 1791. 66 years later and Le Fleur du Mal is considered obscene? Really? Have they read this shit? I want to close this video by saying that there is a movie based on the last years of Marquis de Sade's life called Quills. And it is also pretty involved with the scandalous publication of Justine. It was made in 2000, starring Geoffrey Rush as Marquis de Sade and Kate Winslet as Madeline, the maid attending to him who was involved with him before he died. And it has a supporting cast of Michael Caine and Joaquin Phoenix. Kenny and I recently watched it, and oh man, it was amazing. This is the only movie where I have been a little bit turned on, in suspense, laughing my ass off, and crying with despair. Because I could really identify with the feelings that Marquis de Sade was going through at the end of the movie. If you guys haven't seen it yet and you think you can handle it, you should watch it. It's really, really good. Geoffrey Rush did an amazing job of portraying Marquis de Sade, and he did it in a way that made him, I want to say assholey in a good way. Does that make any sense? Because, oh man, it was just really, really, really fun. I loved it. It was such a good movie. So guys, one last thing before you go. This was partly in collaboration with Her Despair. Check out my sweet digs, man. Yeah! So, the spooky voice that you heard in the very beginning was graciously done by Jay of Her Despair. I said, hey, I'm gonna do a video on Justine by Marquis de Sade. Do you wanna do my intro / teaser? And he gracefully agreed, and I thank him so much for that because he did such a good job. And if you guys haven't seen my video on Her Despair yet, what the fuck are you doing with your life? What the fuck? You're missing out a lot. You need good new goth music in your life, okay? And the big reason why I did want to include Jay in the process of making this video is because he is such an enormous fan of Marquis de Sade, and I'm so thankful that he recommended him to me. And I ended up pleasantly surprised. So thank you, Jay, you have wonderful taste. So guys, if you haven't yet, please check out Her Despair. They have their first EP still out. It is called Biography, and they have more coming out relatively soon, probably within this next year. And go support them on their YouTube channel, their Twitter, their Instagram, all of that fun stuff. And they graciously did send me this t-shirt and this CD, and they also sent me their first kind of demo CD, one of the last copies of it, called Hymns for the Hopeless. And they sent me a sticker and a hand mirror and a postcard with a wonderful, wonderful note. So I really appreciate you guys sending me that. I'm really, really thankful that I'm in contact with such amazing musicians and can collaborate with them in this way. Okay, I will stop carrying on and I will end the video here. So guys, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will be posting more videos on Gothic literature, absinthe, and other fun stuff like that. And I will see you in my next video.
I told her this from the start. The fear of God fills my heart. In her dreams I am not there.